What is up, guys? I'm Marcellus Williams, aka the Swolefessor, here to educate you on health, fitness, social well-being. And today, guys, we're going to be talking about, are crunches actually dangerous for you? Once again, guys, this is one of those topics that's just really controversial in the fitness industry when it really shouldn't be. But before we get into it, first and foremost, I want to explain to you guys that there is a link in the description down below. That's an article that's going to go into a whole lot more detail than what I'm going to go into with this video. You all need to read it. It's not a very long read, but it basically summarizes a bunch of like arguments made, pretty much against crunches, and then the counter arguments made for why those arguments are stupid from Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, who's one of the leading, if not the lead expert in hypertrophy right now. Like, this man has a PhD and his entire focus is pretty much just hypertrophy, like the science of understanding how it works, how to best maximize it, how to put as much muscle on as you can as possible. Now, you guys already know, I always explain the fact that information is made valid by the information itself, not the source that it comes from. But what's cool about Dr. Brad Schoenfeld is that he's somebody who's very objective with looking at all the collective information. He's even had times where he's had to go back and correct himself on certain things because he sees new information, sees how it applies, things like that. So he's a pretty objective individual. So if there was someone who you're gonna trust just based off, oh, so-and-so said it, so I believe it, it would be someone like him, not all these different fitness YouTubers out here, including myself. It just makes sense to like take what he said. Like, it makes sense to like kind of trust what he says over maybe just some random person that you're watching on the internet. But with that being said, yeah, that's gonna be in the description down below, as well as my video that goes over personal experience, science, and meta-analysis, and how those three things connect together, how none of them negate one another, how it all works hand in hand. Strongly suggest you watch that before you watch this video. But now that's out of the way, let's get right into it. So the first thing to understand kind of where all this controversy started, it's pretty much comes, guys, from like just these different studies and these research studies that have been done where they were pretty much testing spinal flexion on pig spines, like using cadavers and everything like that. And they were pretty much trying to test, like, oh, is lumbar flexion like bad? Is it going to cause herniated disc? And what they found is that the spinal flexion on these pigs using the cadavers did cause herniated disc. So from that, like, I'm going to get into the details about the study more, but from that, people have taken that and just decided, like, oh, spinal flexion is bad, lumbar flexion is bad, it's going to cause herniated disc. We need to just stay away from it as a whole. It's dangerous. Crunches are bad because it's a form of spinal flexion, so just stay away from it. So here's the problem. First of all, guys, like I said, even though a study can be done, like in a lab, a very scientific study, it doesn't mean it's always done very well. The first thing you need to understand, guys, is that the difference between, like, pigs and then humans, even though like they like to use pigs because there's similarities between like our anatomy and physiology, here's the big thing. First of all, the range of motion for pigs' spinal flexion is a lot shorter than what ours is. Secondly, understand that with these cadavers, guys, like, it's not very similar to like a living being, for the mere fact that like liquid does not flow back into the disc the way that it does in living beings. When you're using like a cadaver, the liquid's not gonna flow back into the disc. So that's gonna play into it as well. Thirdly, understand that with these pigs, guys, there was no muscle, like the muscle was taken out of them. So that's gonna change the biomechanics of, like, the lift itself. Obviously, like, it's gonna change the biomechanics of a crunch whenever we're looking at things like, a human performing a crunch versus using these cadaver pig spines. Then we also have to understand the fact, guys, is like how the test was done. These pigs were put through thousands of cycles of crunches at a time. Thousands. Guys, who does that? Who in real life goes around and just does thousands of cycles of crunches in one given workout session? At best, we have people who do like, a few sets of maybe anywhere from like 10 to 20 crunches, maybe even more than that. For talking about like bodyweight, like, some people they'll bust out like sets of 50. I know that, like, I've been doing crunches since I was like 11 years old, so that's something I could definitely do. But if we're talking about, like, when we're talking about body weighted, most people may be looking at maybe doing like 5 sets of crunches on average, 10 to 20 reps, and maybe doing that every other day. So at most we're looking at maybe like 4 days out of the week, maybe even 5. You're someone who just like trains your core Monday through Friday, and crunches are a movement that you really like to use. So even with that, even if you're someone who trains your abs like Monday through Friday using crunches, it's still nowhere near to the same extreme of doing thousands of cycles of crunches, right? Like they were having these pigs do. Now, understand this. We have to keep in mind that anything done to an extreme can be bad, right? We already know that. But once again, being scientific doesn't mean being dogmatic. if you're just doing excessive amounts of flexion, or where you're holding it to the position, something like, you know, where you're like this all the time, then yes, that can be bad. That can be bad for your back. You can probably deal with things like herniated disc. It's just bad for your posture as a whole. But to say that crunches leads to that doesn't make sense. It's the same thing as saying that, oh, bench pressing leads to bad shoulders, squatting leads to bad knees, deadlifts lead to you know, bad backs, when we know these movements, when done correctly and properly, when properly programmed, benefit those areas. Bench is going to strengthen your shoulders. Squats are great for your knees. That's why so many physical therapists use them for things like, you know, like rehab, and in some cases people even use them for things like prehab, things like that. And same thing with the deadlifts. It's a great movement when done correctly. So to say that like, oh, crunches are just gonna, like, you know, mess up your spine, it's gonna cause herniated disc, it's just an extreme, guys, done off, quite honestly, a very poor study. And like I said, there's lots of benefits to lumbar flexion and spinal flexion too. That's another big argument too. People want to talk about like, okay, well, whether crunches are like, you know, whether it's safe or not, like it's just not a very functional movement. And that's such a stupid term, guys, when people say things like functional. Like, really, functional means that, like, does it have good carryover to something as far as like your functionality? And it does. There's, guys, you realize how much like lumbar flexion is involved in different sports. There's a reason that, like, you know, top strength coaches and physical therapists and physiology professors and stuff like that have talked about, like, you know, crunches and why it's such a good movement, have incorporated the movements into different trainings and programming. It wasn't until studies like this started coming out where people started trying to be like a bit more quiet, because a lot of people just don't like the backlash they get of going against certain types of research. But if you use critical thinking and actually look at all the different studies done and understand a meta-analysis, understand like, okay, these are just a few studies versus years upon years of research and studies that we have over crunches before, you kind of start to realize, okay, it's a little bit irrational to take this one study and just make it true for everything across the board when the study just wasn't done very well, doesn't have really great carryover to like real life training. Now, this isn't to say that there aren't other ways of training your core. There's anything wrong with training your core in different ways, because once again, there's like, you know, for one, training your core can involve like stabilization, or when we use things like the big movements like squat, deadlifts, overhead press, and we're doing it beltless, like, you know, engaging our core that way. But we're talking about actually trying to build up the abdominal wall. Crunches are an excellent exercise for that. And if we want to use anecdotes, since so many of you are big on personal experience, look at all the different athletes in different sports who do crunches and don't have issues with their spines. And something else people have to understand, guys, is that some people are more susceptible to certain types of injuries than others, just simply due to genetics. Some people are more susceptible to having issues with their disc, whether they do crunches or not. It's like herniated disc. That's just a reality. And to try to blame it on one movement doesn't make sense. Now, once again, proper programming. So you want to have like balance, right? Because that's the big thing. People keep talking about like, oh, flexion, lumbar flexion is bad, spinal flexion is bad, but crunches aren't just flexion, guys. There's a concentric portion to it and an eccentric portion to it. So yes, there's flexion, but then what? There's extension as well. That's what a full crunch is. And then if we think about the fact that a crunch, technically, if we think about a crunch, it only comes up to about 30 degrees, it's not even really getting into the lumbar flexion at that point anyway. So there's just different aspects that we have to look at when we really break down, like, okay, why are crunches bad? Why are they seen as bad? And if we go based off this study alone, well, so many aspects of the study were done so poorly, as far as the comparison of, like, you know, the cadaver pig spines to living human spines, the fact that, you know, the pigs have a short range of motion, the fact that there was no muscle involved, whereas we have muscle, and then things like, you know, intra-abdominal pressure. We have to consider the fact that that's not something that they can really look at when they're using the cadaver pig spines compared to something that we have in real life. Now, once again, people who are sitting around like this for hours, yes, that can lead to issues, that can lead to posture, but doing quick bouts of crunches where you're flexing and extending shouldn't be an issue. And that's with any movement, guys. Like, if you're somebody where, like, you know, like people, like when you're in a cast, if your arm's like this the whole time, right, and it's just flex, not extension, once they take that cast off, what they have to do, they have to go through kind of rehab and build their build the range of motion back up, build the strength back up. So of course, if you're staying stuck in a certain position, if you're staying stuck in a position where a muscle is shortened, then yes, that can be a problem. But any proper exercise you're doing usually involves a concentric and eccentric, the shortening and lengthening of that muscle. So all these different fitness YouTubers out here being like, oh, stay away from crunches, don't do that. First of all, a lot of them don't even know about this study, let's be honest. They're just going based off things that they've heard other people hear, people that they respect, and names that they've heard, like, you know, like, oh, I heard so-and-so say this, so it must be true because they're usually on point, and I'm gonna agree with it. Like, even if I were to say right now, like, yes, guys, crunches are dangerous, the reality is, looking at the research and information presented by Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, as well as just looking at the study itself and seeing that, man, this study was not done that well, it makes no sense to think that you're gonna destroy your spine or herniate your disc from doing crunches. It's just like anything else, guys. It's all about moderation and proper programming of a movement. Too much of anything or any movement done incorrectly can lead to harm or detriment. But when you properly program things, you don't really have anything to worry about. Like I said, nobody's going around doing thousands of cycles of crunches in one given workout session. It's just not gonna happen. It's very unrealistic. And even if they were to do it, like I said, the parameters are very different from a living human being versus the cadaver pig spines they were using in the study. So like I said, you guys be sure to read that down below. And the reason I'm telling you to do it is because I already know people are gonna ask certain questions, right? That they would have already had answered if they simply read that study. So if I see one of those questions, I'm simply gonna say, read the article in the description. You guys know that I'm always big on trying to help you guys. I'm giving you the information. I'm breaking it down, keeping it simple, educating you on health, fitness, social well-being. But part of this channel is also getting you self-regulated and teaching you how to educate yourself. So if you're not even willing to read the study that is literally like given to you, then it's kind of like, what's the point of me trying to give you all this information if you're gonna have all these different questions that you're not even willing to look up for yourself? That's the thing, guys. I don't want to become one of these channels where you just take everything I say as truth by default. I know a lot of you are like, oh, well, you haven't been wrong yet, because I do my best to make sure that I don't do videos over things that haven't already been proven and established as, like, you know, factual, have plenty of evidence and research on it. But the reality is, guys, anyone can miss it. Your favorite YouTuber can miss it. I can miss it. So it's good to be able to learn how to look at things and research for yourself. And really, reading just one article usually isn't even considered research. You have to look at multiple studies, or at least look at a meta-analysis that's a collective summary of different studies. And I'm just asking you to read this one article. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. The answer in short is that no, crunches in themselves are not dangerous. There's no reason not to do them, unless you have like some pre-existing issue already and you've been told, hey, avoid certain types of movements. It's like the same thing with squats. People that have pre-existing issues with their knees, or maybe they've been told, hey, stay away from this movement for right now, and while we're like, you know, seeing what's up with you. That's different. But in general, for most of the general population, no, there's absolutely nothing wrong with crunches. They're a great movement for building up the abdominal wall, and they have great carryover to other things. Because understand, guys, if you're building any part of your core up, so long as you're doing so balanced, because yes, people want to make the argument too, they're like, oh, well, like, you know, there's different parts of your core. If you're only working that part, that leads to muscular imbalances. Once again, that's not an issue with the exercise. That's an issue with improper programming. Obviously, you need to balance out protagonistic and agonistic muscles. Don't just do a bunch of presses, do pulls. Don't just do a bunch of quad work, do hamstring work. Don't just do a bunch of flexion, do extension. So of course, we understand that. But ultimately, you can't blame the exercise for somebody misusing it or using improper programming. But we understand that it has a lot of carryover. Understand this, guys, if you strengthen one part of your core, that's gonna help your core as a whole. Like, and to say that it doesn't is ridiculous. It would be like saying that, oh man, getting your triceps stronger with isolation movements is not gonna carry over your bench press. Of course it is. What is the connection between strength and hypertrophy? A bigger muscle is a stronger muscle, and more often not, a stronger muscle is a bigger muscle. So if you're, why do you think so? That's why one of the few isolation moves that you see powerlifters do, even some of the more minimalist ones, is tricep press downs, because if they can get their triceps bigger and get them stronger, that's gonna have carryover to their bench press. So it's the same thing, guys. Like I said, can you strengthen your core as a whole and work like a lot of core stability with your big movements like squats, deadlifts, overhead press? Most definitely, for sure. But if we're talking about trying to actually really work on the hypertrophy of your abdominal wall, then direct core work is very important. Like I said, there's other moves outside of the crunch, and if you choose not to do crunches, that's fine. But to have this mindset that like, oh, crunches are bad, they're gonna destroy you. Like, one, it's a fear that's coming from a very, very poor study, and it's just being dogmatic, guys. Use a little bit of common sense when it comes to some of these things. But yeah, that's it for the video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, go ahead and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you did. If you did not, leave a comment down below. Let me know what I can do to get better. Like the video, share, subscribe. Keep it simple, specific, scientific. I'll catch y'all later.